Kansas City Young Adult BSF podcast. My name is Connor Moylan.
And I'm Marisa Moylan.
And we are the teaching staff for the Kansas City Young Adult BSF class. Our goal this year is to make Jesus known, and we hope to do that both in discussion questions and in lectures, but also through this podcast going over some of the topics that are interesting, but we didn't have time to get to or explore fully deeply in our lecture. So we have some of those this week from lesson 7. Am I correct? 8. Lesson 8. Lesson 8. And I'm totally keeping track of where we're at. Anyways, Jesus feeds the 5,000 and walking on water is what we are talking about. It is lesson 8, right?
It's lesson 8.
Lesson 8. I'm totally in charge of what's going on here in PSF. So, do you have something you want to get started on, or would you like me to get started?
You're in charge.
I'm in charge.
Let's start with miracles. So, we've had a lot of miracles.
Yep.
This miracle is probably like the...
Which miracle of the two?
The first one. The more public one.
The feeding the 5,000.
Yeah. It's probably like one of the most public miracles.
Yep.
And like, also like, just like knowing that miracles are a way for Jesus to show his power and to show his might. But there's also just like a lot of hidden meaning to them. And, sometimes miracles are just hard to understand because we don't understand God and the decisions that he makes. And this one is different because he just feeds people in the first one, and the second one he walks on water, which like they're all like amazing and great, but he's not healing people in a way, and so I think sometimes people they like forget that those are miracles.
Yeah.
And so just like I think they just like reminded that like what it's honoring to God and like showing just like the miracle that he is, and if you get confused or you don't understand, like giving yourself grace and being okay that we are not supposed to comprehend everything that God does.
Yeah. Did you have some of that pop up in yours, or like in your reading of it or in your discussion? Where's that sort of thought and sentiment coming from?
Yeah, just like the, just like understanding that like, I think that like growing up in the church, like it's like Jesus did all these miracles and like he did, and they are so great. But sometimes I think they like outshine like the goodness of God and like what he like truly is, and like I think like we dive into that and thinking about like what he was truly doing, like he was providing for the people. And that's why he chose to do that miracle.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, Jesus will, as we'll discuss in lesson 9 next week, the miracles are a signpost. They're awesome. They're a gift. They're a blessing. They're pointing towards the ultimate thing. They are not themselves the ultimate thing, and people can get confused and mixed up on that, like they do in the next chapter.
Yep.
So, all right, that makes sense. Thanks for bringing that up. Anything else?
No, you
on
can
miracles?
talk.
Now it's.
I'll just sit here and drink my tea. You can talk.
Back to the Bible. So we're gonna start in 2 Kings 4. Just definitely your favorite book. 2 Kings 4 is just on the top of the list. So why are we doing this here? So what's really cool is when you look in the Old Testament for Jesus, you find him in the feeding of the 5,000 is one of the things that actually has an Old Testament precursor, and it's one that we read about last year if you're with us in the people of the Promised Land. So if you go to 2 Kings 4 verses 42, this is the story we get. A man came from Baal Shelisha, bringing the man of God bread of the first fruits, 20 loaves of barley, and fresh ears of grain in a sack. And Elisha said, "Give to the men that they may eat." But his servant said, "How can I set this before 100 men?" So he repeated, "Give them to the men that they may eat, for thus says the Lord, they shall eat and have some left." So he set it before them, and they ate, and they had some left, according to the word of the Lord. So, same sort of premise of the miracle. Some guy brings some food. The prophet is trying to give it to people. People are like, wait, that's not nearly enough food. And, God says it will be enough food, and there will be even some left over. Except this is what's cool about feeding the 5,000, and it just shows the power of Jesus. Elisha gets these 20 loaves of barley, and he feeds 100 people, which is a miracle. Mentioned that shouldn't even get close, and there's some left over. But Jesus gets 5 loaves and 2 fish, and feeds probably 10,000, people, give or take. So that just shows just the awesome power that Jesus has. And one of the things I thought was really cool about Elisha in particular is you read his stories, and there are a lot of like these precursors to Jesus. A lot of them he really rings true as Jesus. And yeah, so that was one that we read about last year. So if you weren't with us last year, we wanted you to know that these things that Jesus does, they don't just like sort of pop up completely out of nowhere. There is often Old Testament connections, and if you're reading the Old Testament, you can read it with Jesus-centered eyes, and it makes some of these hard, more confusing stories be like, oh, I see that this is the same God, and he's doing these same things back then, just like he did with Jesus, just like he's doing today. But Jesus really pops when you compare him to anybody, because he's perfect, and they are not.
Yeah, and the story of the Bible is a story. It is connected. It flows. It intertwines. It's just like that, like epic, like fantasy novel that you're reading. Like it all connects.
And I think it's really cool that like whoever preserved this story in Kings had no idea what was going to happen with Jesus. It's
that's a really
hundreds
good point.
of years before. So it's like an action of the Holy Spirit that's ensuring that some of these like really odd stories get preserved.
Yeah.
And I think it just has to be because Elisha did a lot of miracles just like Jesus, and the ones that got written down, they obviously had a point to their time while they're getting written down. But they also point to Jesus as well. And that's just so unbelievable that you need some I believe you need divine power to make things like that happen, and happen as much as they do.
Think about like Hebrews, like Hall
of Faith, just
Hall
like
of
when
Faith.
they list everybody.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of like that like they were faithful enough to put that down because it was like God breathed.
Yep, absolutely. So, any questions over that?
No. What do you want to talk about next?
Well, let's go back to everybody's favorite chapter of the Bible, Genesis 1. So, why are we going back to Genesis 1?
I don't know, Connor. I do know, Connor. We're going back to Genesis 1 because we're going to talk about the water, because Jesus walked on the water.
Yes. So, I said in the lecture that the water kind of stands in for like the forces of chaos in the time of the Bible was written. And you see that both in Genesis, and you see that when you compare the creation stories for the people that were around Israel. That this was kind of a cultural motif, or an ancient meme, so to speak.
Yeah, because like in a sense that they didn't it's like they didn't have control of the waters.
Yep, that was definitely a big part of it.
Now, okay, no, go ahead.
No, you got it. You got it.
Okay, well, I won't chaos. Like, can you define the word chaos? Like, what does that mean?
I think like a biblical definition of chaos would be anything that is like acting against God's good created order.
Okay.
So one of the things we think is like God brings order, he brings goodness, and there was a big emphasis on like order, not like in so much of a like things in like perfect line sense, but that like in the things that were set up a certain way so that life and things could flourish. There are rules, you need some order. And so I think a lot of the biblical scholars use they use evil too, but they also use chaos as an idea, just because sometimes, like, what do you do with something like an earthquake or something that is part of the world, or something like a raging storm on the sea? It's hard to call that evil,
right?
But it is like working against the forces of creation. God is like,
so in this, but in like if I'm like. But, like, if I want to think about it, like, when I see something like that, like the waters, or, like, I'm thinking about, like, Jonah and the whale, like, we can see that as chaos, and we can see that as evil, and, like, working in that.
But then in the story like Jonah, you can also see that God still has ultimate control.
And is able to calm the waters, the same as Jesus is able to calm the shore. We know he is. When he gets in the boat, they arrive.
Yep. Or in Jonah, he uses the chaos monster itself. The big fish.
Yeah. So
to
like,
preserve
would you
life.
that's like my other thing is like, okay, Bible Project just did they did a whole thing on the chaos monster, and they went through all the chaos monsters, which I also haven't listened a couple weeks, so I'm probably way behind. But like, is God that like analogy of like God is obviously in control of the waters and like the chaos monster, and like are the chaos monster and the chaos waters, are they like kind of like the same like analogy, or are they different? Like,
they're very similar. Yes, things like the sea versus like the serpent or Leviathan, like the big sea monster, they can kind of be used interchangeably. The monster often feels like a little more personal.
Okay.
Like, this is an imperfect definition, but if you think of like chaos itself, is more described like the sea, whereas like an evil ruler who is, trying to fight against God's will, essentially bring chaos into the world, whether they realize they're doing that or not. They're more described like the monster of like the personal, something that arises out of that to try to spread more chaos. I don't know if that distinction makes sense. One's more of the realm, and one's more of like a creature that's in the realm.
Okay.
So we see it in Genesis 1:2. I guess I'll just read Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void. So another say of like the earth had no order. It's and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. So what's interesting is that as we imagine it, at the very beginning of Genesis, there's the Spirit of God is hovering over the water, because water is like the symbol for nothingness, essentially. It's kind of hard to put ourselves back in their minds, but from what I understand, like they didn't think of nothing like we think of nothing like close your eyes and it's all black, or at least it is for me. That's like that's sort of what nothing is, the absence of something. But for them, the state of nothing was more of like the state of state of non-existence, where like when things were that would feel like existence to us. Like we would say, no, the chaos water, it's not nothing. But the ancient person would be like, no, life can't live there. Human life can't live there. Therefore, it's like against God. Therefore, it's nothing. It's nothing. That is our best understanding of it, and that was an imperfect definition. But so it shows at the beginning that it's like there are the forces, of chaos over there, but God is just hovering over them. And then as you read Genesis, he gives everything its place, its order. He splits the waters, puts things in the sky, populates the land. That is sort of like what God is doing. And it's not that God doesn't immediately get rid of all the chaos in Genesis 1. He wants humans to help him do that. When it says rule and subdue, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens. Our project is to be kind of like God wants to do this with us. In his wisdom, if God wouldn't have just wanted to do away with all of it, he could have. Mm-hmm. But for whatever reason, I think because of love, he chose to be like, hey, do this with me, humans. But then that's when everything went haywire. So what's interesting, and I think the last point, is when you compare it to the other, so particularly the Babylonian creation myth is called the Enuma Elish. And that story talks about the god of Babylon, Marduk, having to fight and kill the sea. The sea is kind of like an equal god to Marduk, and they're fighting, and Marduk does win. And he like splits the sea in half. That's how it's creation. So, and most of their neighbors involve these great battles between whatever god that they worshipped versus the sea god. And in the Bible, it's like there's one God. That force does exist, but it is so much lesser than God. Like it doesn't get the name. It doesn't get the it is not another God. That's not the claim. So
okay.
Yeah. Any other questions, comments on this one?
I have one, but I feel like it's gonna be like it's not pertinent. And like I feel like understanding like chaos is like really hard because it's like it's almost like a little too much fantasy for me.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Would you rather have evil?
I think it's a little bit easier for me to understand. I think that if I could equate chaos with evil, I think it helps. It makes me think about The Witcher.
Yeah.
And what's her face?
Yennefer
and her like chaos.
Yep.
Like I think that like that's the only other place other than like listening, like understanding and listening to the Bible Project and really like thinking about the Bible in this like different, maybe a little bit out of the box understanding. That's like the only other place that I've heard that like phrasing.
Yeah.
And so I think I like think about her when she like heard like let's go for chaos to win the battle and like everything's destroyed, and I could see that like that's not like our God, right?
No.
That is like the God of like other nations and stuff.
Yep. Absolutely.
Specifically when you talk about the Babylonian and the fights, I was like, oh yeah, that almost like mirrors that type of like myth or like lore, whereas like that's not our God. That wouldn't be his like decision or choice.
Yep. Yeah, no, totally. And when you compare them, like, so in Babylon, the guy Marduk, who ends up killing the sea god, he ends up killing another god, and human beings are formed out of the blood of that god. And the purpose of the human beings is to like basically feed the gods and do the jobs on earth that they don't want to do. So imagine like that's what you're told your story is. You're like God blood that's like kind of a servant to somebody else, versus like God is like, calls us images, like calls us to rule in a relationship with him. And how different does your world look up if you think like we're all just servants serving this bigger thing, and like, and we're just like made out of just violence and war.
Yeah.
And like there are these things out here, being up top and powerful means having people serve you. That's kind of like what that essentially means. So it's like, well, I'm higher than this human, so they need to do the jobs that I don't want to do. That's kind of like what that whole myth sets up. Where our myth sets up of like, no, we are men, male and female, co-rulers, images of God, to understand who, and we're all in this together. We're supposed to reign and rule with God, with each other. It sets up such a different worldview.
And I think it goes back to that like God is in control. He is sovereign. Like we have to trust him. And like I'm like looking at my notes, and it's like, how will you trust God that he will provide with what he provides and what he does not provide? Like thinking about it in that sense, like we are set up to have that relationship. It is so different than someone on high above you. Like God is still in control, but like there is like we have like the ability of choice and like making decisions in our own like willingness to have that.
Yep.
I think that is like, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that can be like, for me as a person who likes to be in control and likes it to have it my way, that is like really hard for me. And I think that's why I like thinking about the chaos waters and thinking about, that like God, like that's like how he made it us be is like, it's good for me, but it also challenges me a lot.
Yeah, no, it is really challenging. It's a high bar of like what we're supposed to do.
Yeah.
So, all right.
I think I'm good.
Cool. So, Marissa and I are going to be traveling relatively soon. So, my question for you is, out of the places that we've traveled together, can you think of a favorite that like makes a good story to tell? And I can go first because I've been thinking about it. So one of my favorite places Marissa and I traveled together was we went to Canada for our honeymoon. And we went to Ottawa, where the capital is. And I'll totally nerd out. We had a really nice time in Ottawa. It was lovely in the capital. We went and watched a hockey game. We walked around the capital. It was great. But Marissa knows.
And they lit they lit something, right? That was like, they
downtown.
had like
Yeah, because it was around Christmas.
No, but they didn't. No, it was after Christmas. They lit like the light in the like. There was like they light the light.
Oh, maybe if you're from Ottawa, let us know. We're not remembering very well. But anyways, the coolest thing they had in Ottawa was they have preserved the bomb shelter that they built after World War II to be like, oh no, there's going to be a nuclear bomb. Where are we going to put everybody in case that happens? So they built a bomb shelter, and they have preserved it, and it's now a museum. And it is incredible, especially if you're a history dork, which I am. So it was great. And my favorite part, or the part that was really funny to me, is they had a list of the people who would go in the bomb shelter who, in case to like restart civilization and survive. And their list was 498 men and 2 women. And I'm like, buddy, you guys did not think this one through. If you are the only people alive and you end up with that many men and women, you have a bad ratio. So just the patriarchy strikes again, even when you're preparing for the end of the world, was the lesson that I took away. But anyways, it's so cool, and it's worth a trip to Ottawa all on its own. So, what about you?
I don't know.
Can't think of anywhere that you've enjoyed that we've traveled together?
Yeah, I mean, like, I have places. I think we went to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and I can't remember the name of the park, but it's a beautiful...
Like the Jesse James Park, the one he, like, supposedly jumped down from? With, like, the waterfall?
No, not the waterfall one. All the structures, the big, tall, like... where they like been like carved out by water.
Oh, yeah.
What is that called?
I don't remember.
But it's like, it's beautiful and like it has cliffs and just like gorgeous and like, I feel like I like think about because my pictures like pop up like, and so we went in October and like the trees were beautiful and like you could see through. So yeah, I think that was a really fun.
That was. I really liked Sioux Falls. I thought, having never been to South Dakota, I was like, hey, this is pretty cool. Yeah. And no, it was beautiful.
Yeah. And that was my favorite. So, all right.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for joining us. We hope that this podcast can help you make Jesus known throughout the week. We love you, and have a good rest of your night.
Have a good night.